King Shumeewamee and the Volcano of Mad by Yaged. Episode 5. When Russ was done blinking his eyes this time, he looked around and found himself in a real-life castle. Have you ever been in a castle before? It's pretty amazing. After all, that's why they call them castles. The floor was the color of gold and twinkled like diamonds. If you stepped on a square, it lit up like fire. "Let's go," was all you had to say, and the square would lift off the ground to take you anywhere you desired. A rainbow also stretched across the room from side to side. The ceiling was so high, it touched the sky. Then again, maybe that really was the sky. In the middle of the room, there was a see-through fountain. I guess you would call it a fountain. It was shaped like a flower and made soft, soothing sounds. But instead of water gently rolling over rocks, it blew tiny bubbles into the air. Long, thin corridors extended out from the fountain in 8 different directions. Before Russ was done circling in amazement, the brown paper bag took off down one of the long, thin corridors towards what Russ hoped was the kitchen. After all, someone had to put all those leftovers away so they wouldn't go to waste. "Wow!" Russ exclaimed. "This place is amazing!" "This is true," King Shumeewamee nodded in agreement. Russ began snapping mindlessly. "Can you teach me how to do that?" "You seem to be doing rather fine on your own," King Shumeewamee said. "No," Russ continued. "I meant the way you do it." "Oh," King Shumeewamee said. "You mean snappies. Is that what you call it?" Russ kept snapping continuously. "Do you mean the thing when I snap, and everything around you seems to change in the blink of an eye?" "Yeah," Russ said. "That's what I mean." "Then that would be snappies." The king nodded as if to confirm it. "Will you teach me?" Russ asked. "It's not good to have snappies if you have a temper," King Shumeewamee said. "I don't have a temper," Russ pouted. Just then, the brown paper bag came hurrying towards them from the direction of the long, thin corridor it had gone down earlier. "It's that way!" King Shumeewamee pointed towards a different long, thin corridor, 2 sharp angles to the left. The brown paper bag screeched to a halt, then realigned itself in the direction of the long, thin corridor, 2 sharp angles to the left. "Can I get some more Shumeewa surprise before you run off?" King Shumeewamee called after him. "Very funny." The brown paper bag vaulted a handful of Shumeewa surprise in the king's direction before taking off down the corridor. "Doesn't like running jokes." King Shumeewamee turned to Russ. Russ stared back at him blankly. "No legs." King Shumeewamee made a walking motion with his fingers. "Oh," Russ nodded. King Shumeewamee extended a handful of Shumeewa surprise to Russ. "Candy?" Russ was just about to take some when he suddenly remembered he was upset with King Shumeewamee. "No thanks." He quickly pulled his hand away. "Fine. Suit yourself." King Shumeewamee popped the handful of Shumeewa surprise in his mouth all at once. "Why don't I show you around the place, then? Which wing would you like to see first?" "Wing?" Russ looked up at King Shumeewamee. He wasn't always willing to admit he didn't understand things, so sometimes Russ would use this look instead. King Shumeewamee didn't quite understand. "The wings of the castle!" King Shumeewamee nodded enthusiastically. "Castles have wings?" Russ asked. "Not like birds," King Shumeewamee explained, "but people do call them wings." "That I have to see!" Russ got excited. "Absolutely!" King Shumeewamee got excited too. Excitement can be contagious, like laughter. You know how one person in your class gets the giggles, then another person gets the giggles, until the person sitting next to you gets them, and then you get them too? Pretty soon the whole class is laughing hysterically. Excitement can be like that too. But it's not a bad thing. Instead of a bunch of kids about to be scolded by their teacher, you have a bunch of people with really good attitudes. That's what Russ and King Shumeewamee were like. King Shumeewamee held open one side of his cloak, revealing an intricate map of the castle. In other words, this thing could tell you how to find anything in the castle. "Where shall we go first?" Russ suddenly got a twinkle in his eye. Parents sometimes refer to a twinkle like that as mischievous, but it's sometimes hard to tell mischievous from clever. It's safe to say Russ thought he was being clever. "Which wing of the castle is farthest from where we are now?" Russ asked. "Well, that's hard to say." The king scratched his crown. "One might say the zoology wing, or the peculiarly strange people tricks wing, or the science wing, or the—" Russ was starting to sense King Shumeewamee might go on like this for a while. "The peculiarly strange people tricks wing," Russ blurted out. "The peculiarly strange people tricks wing it is," King Shumeewamee responded. Here's the part where Russ thought he was clever. You can decide whether it's clever or mischievous. As King Shumeewamee raised his hand to snap-ease them to the peculiarly strange people tricks wing in the blink of an eye, Russ interrupted. "Why don't we walk?" "Walk?" King Shumeewamee repeated. "You know what walking is, don't you?" Russ asked. "Well, of course," King Shumeewamee said. "I do it all the time. Well, sometimes I do it all the time." "I think we should walk," Russ told King Shumeewamee. "After all, if I can't learn snap-ease, you probably shouldn't be using it in front of me." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," King Shumeewamee said. "But if you prefer to walk, we can certainly do that." King Shumeewamee took a couple of steps towards one of the long, thin halls, then took a couple of steps back. He took a couple of steps towards another one of the long, thin halls, then took a couple more steps back. He scratched his crown. "Are you sure you want to walk?" King Shumeewamee asked. "Absolutely," Russ nodded, grinning smugly. "I love to walk," King Shumeewamee began to explain. "It's just that to get to the peculiarly strange people tricks wing, we'll have to cut through the—" King Shumeewamee interrupted himself. "And we may run into—" The king interrupted himself again. "Never mind," King Shumeewamee concluded. "If you want to walk, walking it is." King Shumeewamee headed down the long, thin corridor, 2 angles to the right of the long, thin corridor the brown paper bag had hurried down. Russ hurried after him. "Ew!" Russ heard little voices calling out to him. When he looked up, he saw that the walls were covered in a shiny mirror-like material. But instead of reflecting his image back to him, they moved like waves in an ocean. The white peaks that made the crests of the waves formed little mouth-like shapes from where the "ew" voice originated. It seemed like the voices were trying to imitate the eerie background music you sometimes hear in horror movies, but they were much too soft and giggly to really scare anyone. "Don't mind them," King Shumeewamee waved off the mouths. "They don't get out much." One of the voices made an attempt at pulling off a high-pitched scream. "You're getting better," King Shumeewamee encouraged. "Keep up the good work." Russ wasn't exactly scared, but he did pick up the pace in order to try to keep up with King Shumeewamee. He wasn't thrilled with the thought of being left there alone. "This place is weird," Russ whispered to the king. "Weird?" King Shumeewamee said loudly, too loudly for Russ anyway. "Who's to say what's weird? What does weird mean anyway?" "Weird means way different than anything I've ever seen before," Russ said. "This may be true, but I'd have to think about it." King Shumeewamee sat down to think. I don't have time for thinking right now. We'll get back to that later. But I will say this. King Shumeewamee stopped for a moment and scratched the top of his crown, trying to remember what it was he had to say. Finally, he blurted out, "Aha! This is what I have to say." The king cleared his throat ceremoniously. We don't always understand everything we see, or don't see, for that matter. Who's to say what's weird? We have to give people the benefit of the doubt. That's all well and fine, Russ said, but I don't see any people. He whispered this last part, not willing to risk the possibility of upsetting King Shumeewamee.